Vivid verses.
You've always had a problem with me feeling things. That's just who you are. You make people feel crazy for having emotions. We had been together for 4 years and 3 months when she said that. I know the exact figure because I had just come home from my mother's house, where I'd spent the better part of Saturday helping her move furniture after the hip replacement. I'd left Renata's birthday dinner early, her closest friend's birthday, a small gathering at a patio table, 6 people, candles, good wine, because my mother had called at 7 saying her physical therapist had cleared her to start repositioning the bedroom, and she didn't want to wait. I kissed Renata on the cheek, apologized to Camille, and drove 40 minutes each way. I got home at 11:15. Renata was already back, sitting in the kitchen with a half glass of something red, and before I'd set my keys down, she'd said it. She's been composing this for the drive home. This isn't arrival. This is delivery. I stood at the counter. I didn't defend myself. I thought about the dinner I'd left, the furniture I'd moved, the 40-minute drive in the dark, and I let the sentence hang where she'd put it. Renata was not a cruel person. That's important to say plainly. She was warm and funny, and the kind of person who remembered the names of people's dogs. She was also someone who, over the years I'd known her, had developed a particular habit. She felt something acutely, and then she found a story to justify the feeling. The feeling came first. The story arranged itself around it. By the time she told the story, to me, to her sister, to Camille, to her mother, it had the texture of memory. Fixed, certain, and in that story, I was always just a degree more culpable than I remembered being. I had noticed it the way you notice a slow leak, a gradual awareness, not a single moment. A disagreement in the spring about whose turn it was to call the insurance company became, by summer, a story about how I never handled anything administrative. A conversation about dinner reservations that I was fairly sure had been mutual became a story about how I dismissed her preference. Small adjustments, single degrees. But a ship navigated by a compass that reads 1 degree off will end up somewhere else entirely. And 4 years is a long time to drift. You make people feel crazy for having emotions. I turned the sentence over without touching it. I said, I left the dinner to help my mother move furniture. She looked at me with an expression I recognized, a specific softening that meant she wasn't done, but she was willing to table it. I know, she said. I'm not talking about tonight. And that was the thing about the sentence. It wasn't about tonight. It was a thesis, a summary judgment, and it had been delivered with the absolute confidence of someone who had been quietly compiling evidence for a long time. I poured a glass of water and went to bed. She followed 10 minutes later, already past it, already elsewhere, the way she often was once a thing had been said. For her, saying it was the release. I was the one left holding it. The sentence still warm, still turning, still wrong. You make people feel crazy for having emotions. I lay in the dark and thought, I wonder how many times I've heard something like that. I wonder how many versions of me exist in the story she's told. I didn't start the notes immediately. That's worth saying. I thought about it for 2 weeks, and I talked myself out of it twice because it felt excessive, clinical, even like I was preparing a legal file on my own relationship. But I kept returning to a specific discomfort, the knowledge that my memory of things was not considered reliable and that the record being built was being built by someone else. I am a methodical person by profession. I work in compliance. I review documentation for a living. I know what it costs when there is no contemporaneous record of an event, and I know what a documented timeline does to a narrative that has been shaped by feeling rather than fact. So I started keeping notes. Not recordings yet, just brief entries in a plain notebook, written the same night, sometimes the same hour after a disagreement. Date, what was said as close to verbatim as I could manage, who was present, what the context had been. Nothing editorialized. No analysis. Just the record. And once I started looking, I saw the pattern with the clarity of someone turning on a light in a room they'd been navigating by memory. In February, I had covered Renata's car payment, $387, because her direct deposit had been delayed and the auto draft was due. She said she'd pay me back before the end of the month. She did not. By April, when I mentioned it gently, she said she was almost certain she had, and looked at me with the particular expression of someone who believed what they were saying. I had the bank statement. I did not show it then. I noted it. In March, I spent 11 hours over 2 weekends building out the shelving unit she'd wanted for her home office. I bought the materials, $214 at the hardware store. I have the receipt, and she thanked me warmly that first weekend and did not mention it again. 3 weeks later, in a phone call with her sister that I overheard from the hallway, she described the shelving unit as something she'd finally gotten done, with no other subject in the sentence. In April, she told her mother, in my presence, that I'd been distant at her aunt's gathering 2 months prior. I had not been at that gathering. I had been at a work dinner for a colleague's farewell. She had told me the aunt's gathering was casual and optional, and I should go to the work dinner, and I had. The work dinner was in my notes. The conversation clearing me to go was in my notes. I said nothing in front of her mother. I noted the discrepancy later that night. In May, I paid for a weekend trip she'd planned. The accommodation, the gas, the dinners, totaling $634. It was her idea, her itinerary, her choice of location. I'd offered to contribute and ended up covering it entirely. In a conversation with Camille 2 weeks later, Renata described it as a trip we planned together. I noted it. In June, I worked late 4 consecutive Thursdays to clear a backlog, so I could take time off for a trip she wanted to take in August. I logged the hours, 51 additional hours over that month, against a baseline I could document. She knew about the August plan. She didn't know about the Thursdays. In July, she told me I never said I was proud of her. I had said it. I remembered the exact moment. A Sunday morning, her kitchen table, she'd just gotten the news about the freelance contract she'd been pursuing for months. I'd said it directly, without qualification. I had not noted it at the time because at the time I had not yet understood that these things needed to be noted. But I remembered. This is what gaslighting actually is. Not the dramatic kind. The incremental kind. 1 degree at a time. I was not angry when I arrived at that word. I want to be precise about that. I arrived at it the way you arrive at a diagnosis. Not with feeling, but with recognition. Something named is something you can act on. By August, I had the notes. By September, I had begun keeping recordings, a small digital recorder used only when I felt a conversation escalating toward rewrite territory. Not every conversation, not covertly in the general sense. I never used them for anything other than my own reference, and in my state, recording a conversation you are part of is lawful. I was not gathering ammunition. I was gathering ground truth. And in October, she told me I'd said something cruel to her in April. She described it in detail. The words, the tone, my face. She said it had stayed with her for months. She said she'd been waiting for me to bring it up and acknowledge it. I did not feel outrage. I felt something quieter and more final. I know exactly what I said in April. I wrote it down. The decision, when it came, didn't feel like a decision. It felt like arrival. I opened the notebook. The first thing I changed was the car payment. I had sent Renata a Venmo request, $387, dated February 9th. Note, car payment float per conversation. I had sent it in September, 8 months after the original payment, and I had not mentioned it to her. She paid it in 40 minutes, without comment, which told me she'd remembered. She did not mention paying it. Neither did I, but it had moved from the air between us to a ledger. She paid it fast. That means she knew. That means she's known for a while. The second thing I changed was my availability. For most of our relationship, I had been the person who answered. Call at 11, I answered. Text on a Sunday morning that she was anxious about something, I responded. She had come to treat my accessibility as a constant, a resource that did not require acknowledgement because it did not cost anything. I began, quietly, to be less available. Not dramatically, not coldly. I simply began not answering immediately. I gave myself the same courtesies she regularly gave herself. She texted on a Tuesday afternoon about plans for the following weekend. I saw it. I replied 4 hours later. Her follow-up text, sent 2 hours after the first, read, "Hello?" I replied to the first message. I did not address the second. She's not used to waiting. Good. She should learn what it feels like. The third thing happened on a Thursday evening. She told me, with the absolute certainty of genuine belief, that I had snapped at her 2 Sundays ago in front of her sister. Her sister, she said, had noticed it. Her sister had mentioned it to her. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and felt something steady in my chest. I have a note from that Sunday, I said. She looked at me. A note. I keep brief notes after conversations that might become disputed. I have one from that Sunday. There was a pause. Something moved behind her eyes that wasn't quite confusion and wasn't quite recognition. Something between the two. She doesn't know how much I have. Let her calculate. That's an odd thing to do, she said. It's turned out to be useful. I didn't read it then. I'll let that sit. The fourth thing was the story about being proud of her. We were on the phone with her mother, a conference call she brought me into, and her mother mentioned how much it meant to Renata that I was supportive of her career. Renata said, "He's supportive, but he's never really said he was proud of me." There was a small silence. Her mother made a sympathetic sound. I said, "I told you I was proud of you on a Sunday morning in July, when you got the Rewrote contract. You were sitting at your kitchen table. You just hung up with them." Another small silence. "I don't remember that," Renata said. "I know," I said, "but I do." Her mother moved the conversation elsewhere quickly. Renata did not bring it up again that night. But I saw her later, standing in the kitchen doorway with an expression I'd never quite seen on her before. Not guilt, not anger, something more like recalibration. She's running it back, trying to fit my version alongside hers, finding they don't fit. The fifth thing happened because she pushed. She came to me with the April incident again. The word she claimed I'd said, the tone, the cruelty. She'd added details this time. The location in the apartment, what I'd been wearing, the way I'd turned away from her after. I watched her build it. When she finished, I said, "I wrote down what I said in April. Would you like me to read it?" "Yes," she said, and I could hear the confidence in it. She was sure the note would confirm her, or that I was bluffing, or that the note would be inadequate. I read it. 12 lines, verbatim, my handwriting, dated April 14th. No cruelty, no dismissal, a disagreement about a dinner plan that ended in my record, with both of us agreeing to table it. She stared at the notebook. I watched her. "Here it is. Right here. This is the moment. You wrote that after," she said. "You could have written anything. I had expected this. I did not show that I had expected this." I reached into the drawer beside me and took out the recorder. I pressed play. Her voice and mine from April 14th. Both of us. The full conversation. No cruelty. No dismissal. The dinner plan. The tabling. The quiet end. The room was very still. I stopped the recorder. I sat on the table. I did not look at her with triumph. I looked at her with something more like exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a truth for a long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. "I'm not doing this anymore," I said. "Find someone else to play your games with." I've never said anything so quiet and meant it so completely. She said nothing. Her mouth opened once and closed again. Her eyes were bright in a way I associated with either tears or anger. I couldn't tell which, and I realized I'd stopped needing to know. The sixth thing was that I began moving my things. Not dramatically. One bag on a Thursday, a second on a Saturday. My books from the shelf she'd always called our shelf, even though every book on it was mine. The process was practical, unhurried, and I could see her watching it with an expression that was still performing incomprehension, as if she was waiting for me to explain myself, to give her a version she could work with, a version she could later retell. I gave her nothing to work with. She wanted a scene. I will not give her one. A scene can be rewritten. A silence cannot. Her sister called on a Wednesday. Petra. No. That was a band name from someone else's story. Her name was Gwen. Gwen called on a Wednesday evening, and I let her finish the full paragraph before I said anything. Gwen was warm and concerned and very much operating on Renata's version. She said she was worried about Renata, that Renata seemed devastated, that she hoped we could work through whatever had happened. She's been briefed. She only has one source. I let her land. Then I said, "Did she tell you that she insisted, as recently as last week, that I'd said something cruel to her in April, and that when I played her a recording of the actual conversation, she didn't acknowledge it?" Silence. "I'm not saying this to argue with you," I said. "I just want to make sure you have the full picture." "A recording?" Gwen said. "Yes." Another silence. "I didn't know about that," she said. "I know," I said. "Thank you for calling, Gwen. I appreciate you looking out for her." I ended the call. Camille called on a Friday. Lunch, she said, just the two of them. Had she told me her perspective? I let her finish. Camille's version has more emotion in it. Renata has been more upset than I thought. "Did she tell you," I said, "about the conversation we had the night of your birthday? When she told me, I make people feel crazy for having emotions. The same night, I'd left your dinner early to help my mother move furniture." Camille was quiet for a moment. "She mentioned that night," she said carefully. "What version did she give you?" A longer pause. "She said you'd been cold when you got back." I poured a glass of water and went to bed. I could hear Camille turning this over. "I'm not asking you to take sides," I said. "I just want to make sure the night you were actually at is represented accurately." She thanked me. She didn't commit to anything, but her voice had changed. Renata's colleague Britt called over a weekend, texting first, then calling when I didn't reply quickly. She'd known Renata for 6 years and spoke about her with protective energy. She's the most certain of anyone so far. She has a clean version, and she believes it completely. I let her finish. "Did she mention," I said, "that I kept notes after our disagreements, and that when she disputed something I said, I was able to produce a contemporaneous record?" Britt stopped. "Notes," she said. "Brief, dated, written the same night. Why would you keep notes like that?" I was quiet for one beat. "Because I found that my memory of events and her memory of the same events had begun to diverge consistently, and consistently in the same direction." That sentence landed. "I didn't know that," Britt said, and the certainty had left her voice. "Thank you for calling," I said. Her mother called on a Sunday afternoon. This was the most careful conversation. Her name was Lynn, and she was gracious and genuinely sad, and I felt a clean respect for her throughout. She didn't attack me. She asked me, sincerely, what had happened. She's the only one who asked instead of told. I owe her a fuller answer. I walked her through the car payment, the shelving unit, the trip she described as we planned, the April recording. I was factual, unhurried, and I said at the end, "Lynn, I want you to know I care about your daughter." That's why I kept the record. I needed something that couldn't be rewritten. She was quiet for a long time. "I didn't know it had gotten like that," she said finally. "I don't think she did either," I said. "Fully. What does that mean?" "It means I don't think she was being intentionally dishonest. I think she genuinely believed her versions. That's actually the harder problem." Her mother said, "Oh, in the way people say it when something has clarified something else they've been confused about for a long time." I thanked her. I ended the call. That one will stay with Lynn, and it will find its way back. A former colleague of mine named Roy, who had met Renata at 2 or 3 social occasions and considered us mutual friends, sent me a message saying he'd heard I'd done something pretty rough and that he hoped I'd think about her perspective. He's 3 degrees removed from the actual event. He has fragments. I wrote back, Roy, did she mention that the argument that ended things began when she told me I make people feel crazy for having emotions on a night when I just spent 4 hours helping my mother recover from surgery? He replied, oh, no, she didn't mention that part. I didn't respond further. And then, on a Tuesday, Camille called again. Not with Renata's version this time. She called because she'd spoken to Renata, and because something Renata had said had bothered her in a way she couldn't fully explain, and because she had known me for long enough to feel that something in the account didn't settle right. She told me she still isn't sure the recording was from that actual night, Camille said. And I said to her, Renata, he had it dated. And she said, he could have labeled it wrong. I was quiet. I told her that wasn't fair, Camille said. I told her she was asking you to prove a negative. And she looked at me like I was taking your side. There it is. Her own people are looking at the seams. I appreciate you telling me, I said. My voice was level. Are you okay? Camille asked. I'm clear, I said, which was the accurate answer. After I hung up, I sat for a moment in my kitchen, in the quiet. I let the weight of Camille's call settle, not with satisfaction, with something more sober. When a person's closest friend starts looking at the story differently, it means the story is no longer holding. The version is starting to cost her more than it's protecting her. That night, Renata called me herself. Her voice was different from the Wednesday night thesis delivery, ragged at the edges, not composed. She said I had humiliated her by playing the recording. She said I had made her feel surveilled. She said she couldn't believe I'd been gathering evidence as if she were a case to be built. I listened to all of it. She wants me to explain the recorder. I won't. The recorder is already explained. When she finished, I said, I heard you. She waited. I said nothing else. That's it, she said. That's all you have to say? I heard you, I said again. Same words, same tone. I don't have anything to add. She hung up. She wanted to fight. She got a mirror. The changes began within 10 days. The first thing she did was return the $634 from the trip. She Venmo'd it without a note. I accepted it without one. The second thing, she called her mother and, according to Lynn, who called me to mention it, gently, without drama, acknowledged that she had misremembered the April conversation. Lynn used the word misremembered. I suspected that wasn't the exact word Renata had used, but I let it stand. The third thing, she sent me a message, 2 paragraphs, that said, and I'm giving the substance, not the exact words, that she understood why I'd kept the notes and that she had probably been doing something she hadn't fully seen. The hedging was still there, but the acknowledgement was real. I read it twice, and then I set my phone down. The fourth thing, she told Camille, in terms Camille relayed to me, that she had been unfair in how she'd represented certain arguments to mutual friends. Camille said she'd seemed genuinely shaken, not performing, not managing, actually shaken. The fifth thing, she called me. It was an evening call, and her voice had none of the ragged edge from the last time. It was quieter, careful. I need to say something, she said. Okay, I said. You were right. I've been doing something. I'm not going to pretend I know exactly how or when it started, but I've been doing something where the way I remember arguments shifts to fit how I feel. And I've been using that against you, without meaning to. That is the most honest sentence she's said to me in a year. She said, I've been in touch with a therapist. I started last week. I said, I'm glad. She said, can I ask, did you know? Did you know the whole time before the notes? I suspected, I said. The notes were so I could know. There was a long pause. Then she said, I always had a problem with you not reacting. I said it was because you were cold. I think, I think it was actually because when you didn't react, I couldn't rewrite what happened. She's found the mechanism. She found it herself. That matters more than anything I could have told her. I let that sit. One thing, I said. Yes. Acknowledging it to me is one part. The other part is stopping it with the people you've already told. Camille, Gwen, Roy, a beat. That's harder. I know, I said, but it's the part that matters. She said, you're not cold. I want to say that. I've said enough times the other way. She's right that she has. She's right that this is something. Camille called me the following week. She said Renata had called her and corrected several things, walked back the framing she'd given of arguments over the past year. Camille said it had been uncomfortable and a little surreal, and also, she thought, genuinely brave. I've never seen her do anything like that, Camille said. I said, I'm glad she did. She did it fast. Once she started, she just went through everything. The speed isn't what matters, I said. Then what does? Whether it holds. I thought, before the call ended, about Gwen's silence when I mentioned the recording, about Linzo, about Roy's brief, changed message, about Camille calling twice, the second time on her own terms. I thought about what Renata had said on the phone. When you didn't react, I couldn't rewrite what happened, and I understood that this had been true for a long time, and that I'd been the only one who knew it. The record isn't a weapon. It never was. It's just the thing that made the truth load-bearing. What I know now, on the other side of it, is this: a relationship built on a shifting record is not a relationship. It is a continuous negotiation with someone else's preferred version of events, and no one wins that negotiation because the terms keep moving. The notes were not distrust. They were the opposite, an insistence that what actually happened between two people deserved to be real. What actually happened deserved to remain what it was, unchanged by feeling or retroactive hurt. She had spent 4 years making me slightly more wrong in every retelling. Not from cruelty, from a habit she hadn't examined. And I had spent those same years slowly losing my own ground, ceding the record to someone who kept revising it until I stopped being able to trust what I knew had occurred. You make people feel crazy for having emotions, she had said on a Tuesday night in October. What I had wanted to say, what I had never said, because I said the precise thing needed and nothing more, was no. I make you feel something when I refuse to become the version of events you've decided on. And that's not cruelty. That's just staying true to what was real. She told a therapist. Eventually, Camille told me this months later, without betraying confidence, just mentioning it, that she hadn't understood until she heard her own voice on the recording how much she'd been asking me to accept a world that didn't match what had actually happened. And that the recordings, the notes, the quiet receipts, they hadn't felt like ammunition. They had felt, she said, like someone insisting they existed. She was right about that too. I had been insisting I existed, and I had been right too.
Thanks for listening.